America dream because they think the United States has economic opportunity, but even the economic opportunity has been lost. We know that now in the United States, the richest 1% have more wealth than the poorest 90%. That's outrageous. The 6 Walmart heirs have more wealth than the lowest 30% of the American people. And so when they look at this, they say, well, we can get jobs. But then less and less, they talk a lot about the border problem in the United States. Well, there is no border problem anymore because nobody wants to come here anymore because they're not getting work. So it's going the other way. Now I hear that Mexico maybe wants to put up a fence to keep the Americans out of Mexico. Yeah, but that's from before.
Yeah. So, what do you think? In specific, do you think that the history of drugs that is related to Mexico and the U.S., or the history of immigration in North America, would it be likely, or would it be an interesting topic to create a historical or fictional movie or another book about it?
Oliver made a great movie about drugs. You see Savages?
Yeah. Is there any coming up, or is there any intention or motivation for you or for other cinematographers to create another movie about the history of drugs in Mexico and the U.S.?
Well, I think that drugs is a diversion, because I think the American people used that in the past to, when communism went away as a #1 threat, all of a sudden Manuel Noriega appeared on the scene because George Bush, 41, decided that Manuel Noriega was enemy #1. America was always going to invent wars if they need them. So there was a good reason to continue building up the military, was to attack Panama, and shortly thereafter Iraq, because Saddam Hussein was a new Hitler. It wasn't about communism. It was about the poor. It was about the disenfranchised. It was about the resources of the earth. There was no need for the United States to act like that. So the war on drugs, to me, and I've said this, is a disaster. It was a disaster from the day Nixon declared it. More people in jail. The United States has become the most merciless society in the world with the largest per capita prison population. And we have some of the harshest sentencing in the world. Truly, it's against the constitutional, the 8th Amendment, of cruel and unusual punishment. And there's a lot of arguments about it's become a form of slavery for black people as well as for brown people. The figures on the black population are worse than pre-Civil War. It's incarceration. It's a form of slavery, and it crippled, especially I'm talking mostly about non-victim crimes. And that's where a lot of the people who take drugs get stuck. Well, Eugene Jarecki has a new documentary called The House I Live In, which is very effective on that issue. It points right to it. How dangerous this is. We're eroding our inner core. So creating the drug war. America loves the word war. War on poverty, it was called. War on terror. War in Vietnam. War against terrorism. War against evil. I'm a little tired of the word war. I've been in a war. I can tell you they're very dangerous. And they're stupid, most of the part. Illogical, huge waste of manpower and money. Let's cut out the word war. Let's start talking about peace, talking about global community. The drugs come from poverty, from lack of hope. People are going to take them. They're going to find ways to do drugs for the rest of history. They've never gone away. There's all kinds of drug use. Pharmaceutical, legal drugs, et cetera, doctor prescriptions. It's not going to go away. So why have we spent half $1 trillion fighting drugs since 1970? We created a DEA, another bureaucracy like Homeland Security. Our reactions to situations that can be solved have been overemphasized, over-exaggerated.
Is there any hope for the 2013 period with Obama? Or what are the changes?
He has not been very progressive on marijuana, has he? With federal prosecutions and busts, but that's not a big issue. What's a bigger issue is, his perseverance on the Bush war on terror plan.
We're still waiting to see how Obama is going to respond to Colorado and Washington State decriminalizing marijuana. We still don't know how he's going to respond. We certainly hope that he shows a little bit more enlightenment and understanding on these issues. And that other states follow in the footsteps of Colorado and Washington State.
Can I ask you in the context of Chicago, with all the gang and drug violence that's going on here, how important do you think your message is for this city, not just the nation?
The gang's message what?
How important is the message of this project for you, for Chicago as opposed to the nation?
To the gangs.
Gang and drug violence.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about the Chicago situation, do you?
I just know that the death murder rate is totally out of control. It's a terrible situation for minority kids, especially, but for kids in general. It's one of those cases where our absurd gun laws in this country are feeding that. And we need a much broader rebuilding in Chicago and a lot more money put into infrastructure here and education.
What was it? The mayors of all the cities in the United States came together in 2011, was it? In Billy Rose, we quoted in the book, all the mayors said, we want $126 billion. I don't know why they settled on that number. From the that were wasted in Afghanistan to build not to build bridges in Kandahar and Baghdad, but to build bridges in Baltimore and Chicago.
Right.
It's a quote from Billy Rose of Los Angeles. The mayor's conference. That's the biggest statement of all. The nation's mayors are pleading with our government to put the money here to help us.
And during the Bush years, we saw defunding of the inner cities. And a priority with this shift toward hyper-militarism during the Bush years was taking money that was needed from education, and you combine that with the attack on the teachers' unions that's going on. So you've got this kind of pincer movement right now. You got the financial crisis, you've got government policy, and you've got the attack on unions all coming to a head and wrecking our education system. That plus standardized testing. One of the reasons we put this book out is we're so concerned about education. The National Report Card in 2011 said that the area in which U.S. high school seniors are weakest is not math and sciences, but it's U.S. history. Only 12% of high school seniors were judged to be proficient in U.S. history. 12% proficient, not excellent. So the question of education is very, very important to us. Oliver started to say before how much of an effort we're making to get these ideas into the schools, get our books, get our documentaries into the schools. The response from teachers has been fabulous around the country. They understand the problem. They've got to teach to these tests. They've got to teach these ridiculous standards. And so they're pumping information and boring the kids to death. What we did with this documentary and book, especially the documentary, is we bring it to life. There's nobody who's ever watched one of our episodes who said that it's boring. Right? That's the one thing we've never heard. They might have liked all of our interpretations, but it's never boring. And education does not have to be boring. These kids, I've worked with gang kids in the past. That's a long history. But these kids are more receptive to serious education than any of the kids I've ever worked with. They were excited by ideas. They were excited to be doing something positive. I've found working with gang kids that if they have alternatives, rather than killing each other in these stupid ways, they understand how stupid it is to be killing other gang kids from the same backgrounds. We got them involved in supporting strikes, supporting welfare struggles, going to education, any educational work. We'd love to see this book and the documentaries among gang kids as well. We want to give them a positive orientation, not the kind of thing that's leading to all these killings. Terrible situation.
The same could be said for, rehabilitation programs in prisons have been cut back extensively, and that's the greatest shame is to sit there and waste your mind. And we know that the rehabilitation programs have really been very effective nationally, and in the inner cities, we must also point out, as well as the smaller towns, the impoverished inner cities. Who was the first recruiter in? It's the United States government. And the kid without hope of much of a future, the only avenue open to him besides joining a gang is to join the military. And unfortunately, joining the military adds to this bloated census that we have of an army that's coming home as almost an alien population from ourselves. This is a volunteer force, relatively well paid for, that do not coexist in our citizenry with the same aims that we have to make ourselves a peaceful country. So it's a very strange. It is a Roman Empire moment where a young man goes off and joins the military because that's the best hope there is. And he serves in foreign countries, and becomes a rather brutal way of life. But basically, the army in the Roman Empire was bribed. They kept pumping more and more money into the military to keep them quiet. And the military started to participate in the political decisions of the empire, choosing emperors and so forth and so on, becoming power factions. Huge influence, a negative influence.
We have time for one final question, and it's going to be the sister. Sister's going to ask a question. What impact has this had, or what kind of response have you gotten in Hollywood from these productions?
Well, Hollywood, this is a personal project. I'm considered a bit of a eccentric for having done it because it's been 5 years of my life off and on. We did get a good reception with television. That matters. You know, this is hardly mainstream when most of the shows, as you know, are promoting American power and American patriotism as well as vigilante justice. Movies like Zero Dark 30 and the general trend of American movies has been, since Reagan, has been far more conservative. I think that, and the real liberal movies are few and far between. I'd point to, for example, I would point to Syriana as a very good movie that has a progressive point of view. I would point to Michael Clayton, Aaron Brockovich. I mean, there are movies that get made here and there, but it's definitely movies about mayhem and, let's say, the Iraq and Afghani wars have not been treated very well in the movies. Those movies that have tried to be honest have been ignored at the box office, which is a shame. That is, so the tendency in Hollywood is to make money, and to make money, you go with the trend. And television is setting that trend. You know, 24 was, to my mind, a horrible show because it promoted a climate of fear. Homeland is a better show, but it doesn't necessarily go to some of the problems we've raised. But at least that's nicer to see than 24, which was an appeal to naked fear. But I am disappointed on television because it doesn't deal with any of the things that we're trying to deal with in the club. Very hard to get this message out there. Our message is a liberal one. It was out there in Hollywood in the 1930s and 40s, in the early 40s. It was there. And in the 20s, too. And it was briefly, I think, in the 60s and somewhat in the 70s, yeah. I mean, it comes and goes. You know, we have little individual movies get made. JFK got made in 91. I mean, there's always the exception to the rule. China Syndrome was made in 78. You can never quite quantify movies coming in their little... Generally, the movies that do the best are the exceptions to the rule. But the big money is on television where you go with the rule. And the point.
Just before we finish, I would like to say that, I'm Mario Venegas from Chile originally. I represent here Anti-National, the Illinois School of the Americans Watch, and of course ICAT, the Illinois Coalition Against Torture. And I would like first congratulate you because of this book and the videos that you have shown and you have been showing on television. Because you were talking about education, and I think this is a very important fact. The education that you're giving, the message you're sending with this. So to me, it has been really important, especially seeing last night what happened in Chile in your video. Because I think that we have to do education in general about the involvement of the United States everywhere. But in a specific thing, I would like to ask you that being a survivor of torture and being the United States involved in all the torture inflicted around in the world and here in the United States now also, what the message you would like to send? What do you want to say about the United States being involved, training people to torture and interrogate here with the School of the Americans? What's the message you would like to say to people in this problem?
The United States has not only, there's a dark side to American history that Americans don't know about. You know, we like to think of ourselves as the good guys in the world, the ones who spread freedom and democracy. We're exceptional, we're better, we're smarter, we're more generous, we're altruistic. There's been another side to that. And George Kennan laid it out in 1948. He said that the United States has 6.3% of the world's population, but we consume 50% of the world's goods and resources. He says, how are we going to keep the 50% going to the United States, if we're only 6% of the population, says we can't deal idealistically. We have to deal in naked power terms and understand use any force that's necessary to keep our advantage. And we've done that. That's the other side of American history that we're trying to expose because we want to change it. And what we've done, we see it shortly after Kennan, we see it in overthrowing the government in Guatemala, in Iran. We go through the list. In Vietnam, Robert McNamara told my students he believes that 3.8 million Vietnamese died in the war. 3.8 million. We did it in Chile, as you say, in the Dominican Republic, Indonesia, Brazil. We go through all that history, and the other side of that is we train these paramilitary forces. And we train people, the School of America is basically training people in torture. And then we collaborate with the death squad. Operation Condor was the people who were assassinating reformers throughout Latin America. And the U.S. was involved with these people. So we've had this history. Then we get involved with the reactionaries, the Mujahideen, the Islamic extremists in Afghanistan. And then we invade other countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. We've got a history that people don't know about, which is what we're trying to expose, because the United States should not be playing that role. The United States should not be torturing. The United States should not be bombing people, killing civilians, throwing attacks without any restraint. I mean, this is not what most Americans think the United States is supposed to do or stands for. So I think that your experience, sadly, is the experience of far too many people around the earth. When it gets exposed, like in Abu Ghraib, we're horrified. It must have been those bad people over there, or was those rogue elements out on their own. The Major General Taguba did a study for the Army, and he said the United States leaders were responsible for war crimes. Up to the top of the chain, we were responsible for war crimes. So the only question was whether they're going to be prosecuted. And when Obama came in here, and he was legally obligated under our treaty arrangements to prosecute the Bush people who were involved in war crimes, Bush, Cheney on down. One of the worst war crimes you can have is invading another country under no pretext, which is what we did. And Obama says, no, we're not going to worry about the past. We're not going to hold these people accountable for the things that they did. Well, that's the wrong message. Fortunately, in other parts of the world, people have to be held accountable, and these people should also. You know, Oliver was talking about how much better it would have been if we put Osama bin Laden on trial, and like we with some of the Nazi leaders, rather than simply assassinate him. Well, Bush and Cheney and the people who are responsible for torture and other war crimes have to be put on trial also in the United States.
We have time for one last question, and it's going to be brief.
Yes, it's going to be real quick. So following the example that the sir from Chile said, and you quote a number of examples in your book that explains that the U.S. have had a lot of hidden interventions in trying to destabilize the country's economy to privatize their companies and their economies and their economy sectors. So could the U.S. be totally disengaged in the oil company disaster that happened in Mexico and killed 33 people? Could it be outside of that limit, or could it be any possibility that there is some relation according to it? Can history prove us that there can be some engagement in U.S. hidden forces that are trying to destabilize the country to get its natural resources or to privatize its a company? What do you think? Oliver.
About U.S. destabilization. Frequently, the United States has destabilized governments. We did, for example, one example we don't know much about is Brazil in 1964, or any case in which a government threatens to nationalize oil interests or other American economic interests. The United States immediately has moved in to destabilize those governments. And
could the U.S. be disengaged?
The U.S. shouldn't be disengaged. The U.S. should play a positive role.
No, could it, in this specific oil company disaster that killed 33 people in Mexico, and in your book you give a lot of examples of how has the U.S. tried to destabilize or to intervene in radical ways, in military coups, in any kind of intervention, Pacific or non-Pacific. Could there be a relation in between?
Could there be? Yes, but I don't know. I haven't studied it enough to know if there is. Perhaps you have.
Okay.
We need to end the conference now. I'm sorry, but we'd like to thank you for coming to the conference. We'd like to really thank Oliver and Peter for the incredible amount of time that they put into helping us understand more about the untold history of the United States. And there's going to be a luncheon following this, but they have another interview that they're doing. So I wanted to direct them to the interview. Yes,
please join us for lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.